Have you ever heard of imaginary friend? You know, those invisible creatures that children would create to provide artificial friendship for themselves. It's funny to think of how real they seem to a child when everyone else knows it's just a figment of their imagination. It's almost as if they were real, except after a while this friend dies down and you never hear of them again, usually because the child loses interest or has just outgrown them. But even something so childish and so friendly can have a dark side. You just never see it. When I was in fourth grade, I never had a lot of friends. Actually, I had no friends at all. Everyone just didn't like me. I tried making friends, but they would just turn me down for whatever reason. And every day, I would eat my lunches alone and spend recess sitting by a tree just watching how much fun everyone else was having. I specifically remember how bad I wanted that, to the point it was unbearable. After many failed attempts of acquiring friendship, I realized that it would just be easier to make one. The plan was foolproof because this friend couldn't say no. I was a very creative child back then, so it wasn't hard for me to create an imaginary friend. Her name was Susan. She seemed to be around my age, had straight blonde hair and freckles that pasted across her cheekbones and nose. She was so friendly, well, to me anyways, because no one else knew her. I spent every second of every day with Susan. She sat with me at lunch, and we would come up with stupid jokes about school and talk about how fat my teacher was. And during recess, we would play tag. I guess no one noticed me talking to myself or running around the field alone. She even came home with me. Susan and I were the best of friends throughout the rest of elementary school. By the time I hit middle school, though, I took note of reality. I noticed how childlike it was to have an imaginary friend. Eventually, I just stopped talking to Susan and went on with my day normally. But Susan wouldn't leave. Every now and then I would see her in the back of a room or walking behind me down the hallway. Every time I glanced at her, she smiled as if she was excited to be around me. Another thing I noticed is that she aged with me. I came to the conclusion that I couldn't get rid of Susan because wasn't she just wasn't an imaginary friend anymore. She was a figure that silently followed me, who I had absolutely no control of anymore. I didn't mind because she wasn't getting in the way of anything at the time. She managed to stay with me until I began high school. By that time, I made a few really great friends who Susan had an immense hatred for. I would hear her mock them and give negative input to anything they said. She didn't like the fact that I had friends with someone other than her. She didn't hate me for it, though. She didn't even hate me for ignoring her for the past few years, and continued treating me as if I was her best friend, which apparently I was. Susan started to become more sinister and vile. It seemed as though she hated everything besides me, which had its consequences. I remember one time I was talking to my mom trying to ask her a question while she was on the phone. She was cooking something on the stove and had her back to me while I was sitting in the kitchen island directly behind her. I called her name about 3 times before Susan hit her. I remember the amount of shock I felt at that moment. How would Susan hit her? This whole time I believed that I had somehow gone a bit crazy and just couldn't get rid of a childhood apparition, but it seems as though Susan took her own physical characteristics. My mom turned around a bit angry and asked me why I hit her. I couldn't say it was Susan. I was 14. She'd think I'm crazy. So I just told her I was sorry, but I'd forgotten what I was going to ask. I was still overcome by what had just happened. I had trouble sleeping that night. I didn't know whether or not Susan was an actual being. She has a mind of her own and could physically interact with everything, but no one sees her. Could they possibly just be ignoring a real person? No, it's impossible. I made her. She never existed before the fourth grade. Soon after that, things started to get worse. She started to trip and push over people she didn't necessarily like. She even hit a few of my friends for making friendly insults towards me. I started to become somewhat fearful towards her and a bit uneasy when I hung out with my friends. This continued up until I was in my sophomore year of college. I was hanging out with my friend Morgan in her apartment. I was there because we were working on a project together, but we waited up to the last minute to complete it, so we had to get it done within the next 2 days. It was a fun night, and Susan was nowhere to be seen, so I wasn't as uneasy as I usually would be. Considering that Morgan was my absolutely best friend, whom I trusted the most, I decided to tell her about Susan. I was. It was kind of awkward telling her because I've never told anyone that before, and she wore this skeptical look on her face when I spoke. What are you? Insane? She chuckled. I started to feel a bit restless. No, I'm not insane. She's real. These things actually happened. You have to believe me. I preached for myself. I didn't know what else to do. Look, whatever you're saying, I don't want to get into it. There's no way an imaginary friend can come to life. This isn't an R.L. Stein book. You need to get a grip on yourself. I couldn't help but feel let down. My own best friend didn't believe me when I know I was saying the truth. I left soon after that. Susan was still nowhere to be found, so I started to consider that I might actually be going crazy. The next morning, I was awoken by three forceful knocks on the door. I wiped my eyes as I went to open the door. When I answered it, I was able to make out two policemen through my foggy vision. They told me that I was being taken into custody for questioning and led me to the back of their police car. I had no idea what I was being questioned for. I just figured it was for a stolen item or something of that matter. I was horribly wrong. They told me that Morgan was killed last night. Apparently, her roommate found her bloody corpse upon coming home late at night. According to a few witnesses, I was the only one who was there before that. I tried to tell them about how I left and that it couldn't possibly be me who killed her, considering she was my best friend. They pointed out that the only trace of another person was me, so it couldn't have been anyone else. But I knew. I knew deep in my gut it was Susan. I found myself in prison afterwards. I saw Susan for the first time after that, and I knew I couldn't ignore her anymore. What are you? I asked. She chuckled with a big grin stretching across her face. I'm you, she answered. I never spoke to her again, but she still remained by my side, even in prison. Every day I tried convincing the guards it was Susan, but they just shrug it off. Soon they started giving me pills to cope with my insanity. But I know I'm not insane. Susan exists. She killed Morgan. It wasn't me. You have to believe me. It was Susan. She's real. She's not an imaginary friend. She's real. She's real. I know she is. She has to be. You believe me, right? Don't you? I told you everything. You have to believe me. You have to. God, I need to get out of here. I can't take it anymore. I don't know how I'll escape. I might have to kill a few guards. I can't though. But Susan can.